You think you know ancient Egypt, pyramids, golden masks, dead kings sleeping under the sand. But for 500 years, Egypt was a war machine, chariots running from deep inside Sudan all the way to the Euphrates River, the most powerful empire on earth. And here's the part I can't get over. Nothing stronger ever conquered it. In the end, Egypt was beaten by time itself. So how did the land of tombs become a conqueror and then lose absolutely everything? To understand the fall, you have to rewind, way back, further than the pyramids. Egypt was not born an empire, it was born along a river. Picture a thin green ribbon of life snaking through a brutal desert. That is the Nile. Around 3100 BC, by most reckonings, a king united the two halves of that ribbon. Upper Egypt in the south, Lower Egypt in the north. Tradition gives the credit to a king named Narmer. One crown, one country, and the clock of pharaonic Egypt starts ticking. Now here is the number that breaks your brain. That clock would run for roughly 3,000 years. Cleopatra lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than to the building of the Great Pyramid. Egypt was already ancient when Rome was a swamp. And those pyramids? They came early, shockingly early. The Old Kingdom, around 2600 BC, was the Pyramid Age. The three giants at Giza rose from the sand. The Great Pyramid was the tomb of a pharaoh named Khufu, built in roughly 26 years. It stayed the tallest thing humans had ever made for thousands of years. But think about that. By the time Egypt becomes a war machine, the pyramids are already 1,000 years old. Even to the Egyptians, they were ancient ruins. So what turned this calm river kingdom into a conqueror? The answer is humiliation. Roll forward to around 1650 BC. Foreign rulers seized the north. We call them the Hyksos. Outsiders ruling the delta from a city called Avaris. For the proud Egyptians, this was a wound that would not close. Their land, run by strangers. But the Hyksos brought something with them. The horse-drawn war chariot, the composite bow, bronze weapons. The Egyptians watched. The Egyptians learned. And then they turned those exact weapons around. Around 1550 BC, a pharaoh named Ahmose I storms the delta. He smashes Avaris and chases the Hyksos out of Egypt entirely. And the moment he wins, something new is born. We call it the New Kingdom. The Kingdom of Tombs is about to become an empire of conquest. And the first ruler to make that empire shine wasn't a king. It was a queen who became a king. Her name was Hatshepsut. Around 1479 BC, she did the almost unthinkable. She took the full crown of pharaoh, not queen, pharaoh. She wore the regalia of a king and ruled for roughly 21 years. And she didn't rule with war. She ruled with gold and stone. She raised towering obelisks at Karnak. She carved the breathtaking temple into a cliff at Deir el-Bahari. She sent a famous trading fleet to a distant land called Punt, a golden age, built by a woman who called herself king. So why have most people never heard of her? Here's the chilling part. After she died, someone tried to erase her. Her name was chiseled off the monuments, her face hacked away, her statues smashed to pieces, and it almost worked. She was lost for thousands of years, until Egyptologists rediscovered her in the 1800s. But who erased her, and why? For a long time, the finger pointed at the man who ruled next. The trouble is, we still aren't sure why it happened. Some now think it was a cold political move to lock down the throne for the men who came after. We may never know, but we do know the man who came next, and he was the most dangerous pharaoh Egypt ever produced. His name was Thutmose III, and historians gave him a nickname, the Napoleon of Egypt. Over roughly 20 years, he launched around 17 military campaigns, year after year, marching out, conquering, returning. And his masterpiece came at a place called Megiddo, around 1457 BC. Picture it. An enemy coalition is dug in. There are 3 roads to reach them. 2 are safe and wide. One is a narrow, terrifying mountain pass called the Aruna Pass, so tight the army has to march single file, one man behind another, helpless if attacked. His generals beg him not to take it. Thutmose takes it anyway. It's a gamble that should have gotten him slaughtered. Instead, he bursts out of that pass exactly where the enemy isn't looking. Total surprise. The Egyptians shatter the Canaanite line. This, by the way, is the earliest battle in all of human history that we can reconstruct in real detail. But here's the twist. Egypt almost threw it away. The soldiers stopped to grab the loot scattered across the battlefield instead of chasing the fleeing enemy. The enemy escaped behind the city walls. And so a battle won in a single charge turned into a grinding siege that dragged on for around 7 months. The lesson the pharaohs never quite learned: Greed can cost you the war. When the dust settled, Egypt's power reached the Euphrates River in the north and deep into Nubia in the south, the edge of the known world. Egypt was now the superpower of the ancient Near East. This was the peak. This was as high as it ever got. So how do you fall from the top of the world? You start by fighting your own gods. Now here's the part nobody tells you. The greatest threat to the Egyptian empire wasn't the foreign army. It was a single Egyptian king with an idea. Around 1353 BC, a pharaoh named Amenhotep IV has a revolution in his head. He decides there is really only one god worth worshipping: the sun disk, the Aten. In his 5th year, he renames himself Akhenaten, and he tries to switch off 1,000 years of Egyptian religion overnight. Many call it the first known one-god religion in history. He goes all in. He builds a brand new capital city from nothing, out in the empty desert, dedicated entirely to the Aten. He closes the old temples. He shuts down the old gods. And he yanks all that temple wealth, the immense fortune of the priesthood of Amun, straight back to the crown. But while Akhenaten stares at his sun god, the empire is burning. We know this because the letters survived. Clay tablets dug out of his desert city called the Amarna letters. They are desperate cries for help from Egypt's allies and vassals. One ruler, Rib Hadda of the city of Byblos, sends plea after plea. Enemies are at his gates. He begs for troops. And Egypt mostly ignores him. He sends dozens of letters. He loses his entire kingdom. The empire Thutmose built was being neglected to death. So what happens when the revolutionary dies? Everything snaps back. The throne passes to his young son, a boy of about 9. We know that boy by another name, Tutankhamun. He abandons the desert capital. He restores the old gods. He moves the throne back to Thebes. He even changes his own name, dropping the sun god Aten and putting the old god Amun back in. He was dead by about 19. And later pharaohs were so disgusted by the whole affair that they treated Akhenaten as a heretic, tore down his monuments, and struck his name from the official king lists. Erased. Just like Hatshepsut. Egypt survived its own revolution, barely. And then came the pharaoh who turned survival into the greatest PR campaign in history. Ramesses II. Ramesses the Great. Around 1274 BC, he marches north to fight the Hittite Empire at the city called Kadesh, and he walks straight into a trap. Enemy spies feeding false information. Overconfident, he pushes ahead with just his lead division and the Hittites ambush him. By the ancient accounts, they fielded around 3,500 chariots. It was one of the biggest chariot battles ever fought, and Ramesses is suddenly nearly alone, surrounded, fighting for his life before a second division arrives just in time to save him. So what does Egypt's greatest showman do? He goes home and covers the temple walls with carvings of his glorious, heroic, personal victory. The trouble is, it wasn't really a victory. He never even captured the city of Kadesh. By the cold modern reading, the Battle of Kadesh was a draw. But the real history happens about 15 years later. Ramesses and the Hittite king sign a treaty around 1259 BC, and it survives in both the Egyptian and the Hittite versions. No more war, mutual defense, the return of fugitives. It is the earliest surviving peace treaty in all of human history. Two superpowers, exhausted, choosing peace in writing. That is the high water mark of the ancient world. And from a high water mark, there is only one direction to go. The first blow came from the sea. Around 1175 BC, under a pharaoh named Ramesses III, a wave of raiders we call the Sea Peoples crashes into Egypt by land and by water. Who were they exactly? Honestly, we still don't really know. Their origins are one of history's great unsolved mysteries. But we know what they did. They were tearing the ancient world apart. They burned the great city of Ugarit to the ground. They helped topple the entire Hittite Empire, the same superpower Egypt had just made peace with. One by one, the great powers fell. We call it the Bronze Age collapse. And Egypt, Ramesses III beats the Sea Peoples on land. Then he lures their fleet into the narrow branches of the Nile Delta and destroys it in the water. Egypt becomes essentially the only great power of that age to survive the storm. But survival came at a terrible price. Egypt was alive and gravely weakened. And here's a strange little detail that tells you the empire was rotting from the inside. Around 1157 BC, the skilled workers who carved the royal tombs simply stopped working. Their grain rations hadn't come. Egypt didn't run on coins. Workers were paid in grain and beer. They waited 18 days past payday. Then they marched out and, by the record, chanted 3 words. We are hungry. It's widely called the first recorded labor strike in human history. The richest empire on earth couldn't feed the men who built its tombs. It gets darker. By the end of the New Kingdom, those very royal tombs were being robbed, sometimes by the officials sworn to guard them. The kings weren't even safe in death. The priests had to gather up dozens of royal mummies, re-wrap them, and hide them in secret caches. One cache, found in 1881, held more than 50 kings and nobles stuffed into a single hidden tomb. Thutmose III, Ramesses the Great, all bundled together for safekeeping. The conquerors of the world hidden from their own people like contraband. After that, Egypt simply came apart. Around 1070 BC, the unified empire shattered. Kings in the north, priests of Amun ruling the south. And then began the long humiliation. Around 945 BC, a dynasty of Libyan descent takes the throne. Then, around 747 BC, Nubian kings from the kingdom of Kush, from what's now Sudan, march north and conquer Egypt. And here's the twist, they revered it. They reunited the country and revived pyramid building after 1,000 years. But the conquerors kept coming. The Assyrian Empire smashed the Kushite kings and, in 663 BC, sacked the holy southern city of Thebes, Egypt's sacred heart, for over 1,000 years. Then, in 525 BC, the Persians under Cambyses swallowed Egypt whole. The age of native Egyptian kings was, for all practical purposes, over. And then, a young Macedonian named Alexander the Great took Egypt from the Persians in 332 BC. He founded a city on the coast and gave it his name, Alexandria. After Alexander died, his general Ptolemy grabbed Egypt and started a Greek-speaking dynasty that ruled from that glittering city for nearly 3 centuries. The pharaohs of Egypt were now Greeks, which brings us, at last, to her, the most famous Egyptian who ever lived. And she wasn't even Egyptian, Cleopatra, the 7th of her name. Greek by blood, Macedonian descent, but unlike the rest of her family, she actually learned to speak the Egyptian language. She was the last active ruler of Egypt, the last pharaoh, and she made one bet to save her dying kingdom, Rome. She allied herself with the most powerful man in the world, Julius Caesar, and had his son. Then, after Caesar fell, she tied her fortunes to the Roman general Mark Antony. It was a gamble for survival, Egypt clinging to Rome to stay alive. Remember Rome? The empire from before this one? Here's where these two stories collide. In 31 BC, the Roman Octavian crushes Antony and Cleopatra's fleet at the Battle of Actium. Then he invades Egypt itself. Antony dies. And Cleopatra dies too in 30 BC, by legend, from the bite of a snake, though honestly, we don't know for sure how she died. And that was it. The last pharaoh was gone. Octavian, soon to be called Augustus, annexed Egypt and turned it into a Roman province. He hunted down and executed Cleopatra's son. And then he seized the real prize, Egypt's colossal supply of grain, which would now feed the city of Rome itself. The river kingdom that fed itself for 3,000 years now fed its conqueror. 3,000 years, older than almost anything we can name. An empire that reached the Euphrates, survived the end of the Bronze Age, and outlived every rival of its time, finally swallowed by the same Rome we followed last time. The pyramids that opened our story were already ancient ruins when the last pharaoh died beside them. And maybe that's the real lesson, hiding in the sand. Even the longest-lived empire on earth was, in the end, just one more chapter for someone else's empire to inherit. Egypt didn't grow weak. It just lasted long enough for the whole world to change around it, outliving every rival, every weapon, and every god it ever invented, until the only thing left that could ever beat it was time. So which empire rises next from the dust? Stick around, and we'll find out together.